Right, awesome. So now I have to get into the mindset after Stephanie's awesome presentation, but we're staying in early modern period, which is my absolute favorite. So in this presentation, um, it is a work in progress, so I welcome any and all comments, because I went into this topic thinking it's going to be quite smooth. It turns out harder and harder the more I research. But what are we talking about? So, in one of the chapters in the Natural History of Oxfordshire, Robert Plot recounts a lot of discoveries that he has made during his survey of the county. Um, in a kind of strange way, he spends a lot of time discussing a particular type of clay that he has found in the parish of Nettlebed, that usually was used for brick making. But he identifies it as a red earth that resembles Bolus armenus, which at that point was a very well known Armenian bowl, very long employed for medical practice, usually against diarrhea or internal bleeding. Jesus Christ. Um, I find this suggestion very interesting because he doesn't point towards any experimental verification. He admits that he has not tested this earth for any capacity to induce any of the effects he ascribes to. He basically invokes Bolus Armenus and the long scientific tradition on it and places this material that is abundant in Oxfordshire within the same tradition by almost similarity or analogy. And in a long history about the relationship between um, early modern culture, health, and the influence of the environment, I think there is something more to be said about these passages that I'm going to show more of very soon. Um, so basically, we have um, two very important strands of scholarships that so far has been often placed against each other. So Alexis Cooper, very famous work on how local knowledge was produced, where she argues that a lot of the practices and materials that were rooted in particular places um, were formed as sort of a response to um, an influx of exotic goods and naturally coming to European markets. While fascination with foreign medication intensifies, and that essentially the formation of indigenous or local knowledge is a response to the global exchange. Meanwhile, David Beck's work is more about how county natural history specifically actively generate local knowledge, especially during periods of kind of political and cultural exchanges. But rather than viewing it as a response to a more global process, he frames this project as very explicitly local and rooted in the place itself. And while quite often those two views can be put against each other, I think that if we put them together, the reading of what I've chosen about medicinal herbs in the natural history of Oxfordshire becomes much more interesting and full. So basically, what I'm going to present here or like argue is in the first part that healing herbs, in the more global context, we can gauge a lot of the information about what is happening in the medicinal market from what Plot tells us and how he's trying to legitimize local clays by analogy with very prestigious foreign remedies, um, that are substances that have been for a long time grounded in classical authority, and how he's trying to advance English alternatives. Why would he do that? And why is he building that knowledge specifically in the county natural history? Which then I'll move on to the type of history that is a county natural history, the links to patronage and political economy in it, and why and how an Oxfordshire parish could suddenly be presented as a site of very rich healing materials comparable almost to Mediterranean ancient islands. And why would he offer such reading? One thing that I need to make sure everybody kind of is on the same page on, is what is terra sigillata, because we're going to be encountering this name for quite a long time. So terra sigillata, or medicinal earth, sealed earth as well, it is basically a type of medicinal clay that is stamped into little tablets. And the seals on them usually act as a mark of authenticity. The roots go very far into antiquity, so ancient authorities such as Pliny the Elder or the Discordies gave it a lot of credibility as an astringent, or almost a panacea for intestinal problems, poisoning, bleeding, fevers, but also the plague. Um, and its power is not usually attributed to any chemical composition or influence on um, humoral bodies, but to where it comes from, so to the provenance. And above all, the most kind of important ones or celebrated ones are earths from Lemnos, Armenian ball, but also Samian earth. Um, and those reputations are very inseparable from their geography. So each tablet that comes through has been impressed with a stamped seal, which materializes that connection of where it comes from, conferring kind of like a quasi-sacral authority rooted in the place. Um, right. So in the chapter of the earths, Robert Plot describes several Oxfordshire earth soils, clays that he thinks have medicinal potential. So one example is a white clay, which Plot describes as very porous and friable, without scent, taste, or smell. It turns milky when he tries to dissolve it in water. And he quickly moves on from this description to making a comparison to what Conrad Gessner much earlier described as a lac lunae, or moon milk. And on this basis, basically, Plot identifies the earth that he has found with the medicinal clay described in Gessner, and later cited in very famous authorities such as Agricola, but also Athanasius Kircher. And what stands out to me is how quickly this discussion becomes less about the Oxfordshire clay itself that he has come across, um, than about the tradition that surrounds Lac Lunae, and all of its very sort of classical or well-known names. So again, by analogy, he recognizes virtues of celebrated foreign medicaments and projects that onto the local one he has come across. And he almost makes a further leap where, because the Oxfordshire clay appears to him almost indistinguishable from Lac Lunae, he extends its virtues to the virtues of the Samian earth as well, which was credited with being good to stop bleeding and treat women's disorders. So almost through resemblance alone, these medicinal properties are transferred onto the Oxfordshire material, effectively borrowing prestige from classical or exotic authority. And he does the same thing in an account of a red clay, which we've mentioned before, dug in nettlebed from usually clay used for bricks, which he identifies as Bolus armenus. He noticed that it adheres very strongly to the tongue, which was a standard test, though he admits to the readers that he has not been able to persuade a trial. He has not checked if it actually provokes sweating as a bolus armenus should, but he nevertheless identifies it as the same material. And he reinforces those claims by bringing in a lot of contemporary practitioners in Oxfordshire, especially Henry Sayer, and also his friend Apothecary Cross, who both have either used types of herbs in their practice or have sort of admitted that it works as frequently and effectively as any of the foreign Fs, whatever. Um, so I was interested in a lot of the kind of culture and situation surrounding these claims, and why would he spend so much time on them and kind of so much affirming that these local earths have as much power as any foreign earth. And I think one thing that needs to be said is that he can do that because at the time, a lot of the people are um, very concerned about the kind of Hippocratic idea of as what is in places where the climate that you live in and the place that you're in influences your health, and almost the particular place you're born with is the best possible place for your health. So at the time, because we have a huge influx of medications from abroad, a lot of new materials are coming in onto the market. Parallel, a lot of arguments come in about the importance of providence and national character in medication. So I brought in Thomas Tryon, Nicholas Culpeper, and also William Harrison. They kind of start suggesting that foreign plants and foreign medications are actually completely ill-suited to English bodies, and that each country and even county has been almost divinely furnished to supply all the appropriate resources you might need for living in the area. Culpeper specifically championed a lot of medicines that were drawn from local fields and rivers rather than costly imported ones, and Tryon went further, casting the preference for exotic drugs as almost a sign of societal and moral decline. And we can see that Plot, in the quote on the right, he is very aware of the Hippocratic cult. He also emphasizes the links between Oxfordshire being a very healthy and a brisky place that affords a very affable and courteous humor, and that the people that live in Oxfordshire, because it is the best place to live, essentially, that the people also live here long and exceptionally healthy lives. Um, so I think it is quite a good thing to say, or at least a good thing to infer, that from this view, he has sort of an a good space to almost like view these local clays as not just substitutes, but also naturally suited to English health much better than the foreign earth might be, and that they deserve being put forward. But of course, it couldn't be as easy. So on the quote on the left, he makes an interesting comment about how actually it doesn't matter how good this earth could prove to be. He cannot promise any. He cannot promise any almost like profit from any owner of this earth. And that is because, in a lot of ways, at the time, people are starting to look for replacements in all sorts of countries. And I just brought in a couple of different varieties. There are hundreds of them coming into Europe at the time, mostly because there's a lot of adulteration of medication that is coming from the Mediterranean. People at the same time praise the distance and rarity and potency of stuff that comes from very far off ancient Greek islands, but people who sell them want to kind of minimize the distance, minimize opportunities for counterfeit medication, and also try to convince people that actually valuable earths don't need to come from distant islands, that we can find just as good earths in closer to home. On the bottom, you have one of the earliest philosophical transactions of the Royal Society, where they posted a new finding of an earth that is as good as Bolus Armenus and Terra Silesiaca in Hungary and is much more accessible than any other could be. Um, the the advocacy had a limited impact, interestingly. So I brought up a couple of uh, pages from medicinal books and recipe books from different families, different contexts. So even proponents of the idea that you should use homegrown or inexpensive medications did not provide any alternatives for foreign herbs. Culpeper recommends terra lemnia and terra silesiaca, terra samia all the time. Um, Gideon Harvey, who proposes a lot of affordable treatments, still uses an Armenian elf, even though most of the time it costs almost a day wage of an average person. So economic or nationalistic arguments for domestic remedies are still secondary to the prestige and perceived efficacy of established foreign substances. And I think that an interesting one is the last one on the page where um, there is even some confusion about what is native and what is foreign. So the author Nathan Bailey advertises his book as a guide to herbs and plants and materials that are of English growth and suited to British constitutions, but nonetheless he includes numerous imported substances, including Armenian bull, and not a single local clay or English clay in them. People are criticizing clay. It is known as stiff, costly, profitless to farm, hard material that farmers do not appreciate. John Hill argued that actually local English pipe clays, because usually they were brick or pipe clays, um, are passed off as prestigious medicinal herbs only by liars and adulterated medication. He thinks they have um, no standing in the medical world, they are not useful, and basically that using local herbs is ruining the medicinal herb reputation for everybody. And he is not alone in the critique. The author of the earliest official London pharmacopoeia stated the same thing, that English herb is only sold in apothecary shops or in medication shops under the name of foreign herbs, and that nobody of the right mind would basically sell English pipe clay as medication or any local clay as medication. And this is why I think, in order to find out perhaps why Plot still gives them so much power and so much revere, is why we need to look at this work as a county natural history written by a county natural historian, um, because it gives us a much deeper view. So Plot immediately signals that the focus is the county itself. He wants to produce a work that shows things useful to man through natural history, trade, and local improvement. The county is the subject and the lens through which his knowledge is communicated and gathered. And in England at the time, this is a distinctive form of natural history writing, growing out of earlier practices of genealogy and chorography based on the study of and formation of regional identity. And chorography in particular privileges a very close description of particular character of very specific regions. So from early modern antiquarians such as William Camden, they all catalogued soils and landscapes throughout the country, but often were read on a very small county level and are often annotated as such. So the county at the time is a basically principal unit of provincial life, and antiquarian inquiry gradually expanded into broader environments, but then events such as the Civil War very disrupted this culture. Patrons were very absorbed in political and military concerns. They didn't have time or money to spend on propagating natural history or any kind of writing of this kind. So once the restoration rolls in and there is revived interest in recovering knowledge of the past and present condition of counties, Natural historians such as Robert Plot can offer something more than just praise. They can document the land, but also connect the family seat and authority to the territory, implying almost that the status doesn't only rest in your title or wealth, but historically grounded relationship to the place. And I think that this reciprocal dynamic does something important here because, as Wendy Wall has shown, this kind of writing already is becoming to English the soil, creating kind of collective characters, but also the significance of the county runs very deep to the point where some people basically viewed different counties as almost people from different countries. Robert Plot at the time is almost the perfect person to do such a study. He has interest in chemical medicines, alchemy. He has spent years surveying and engaging in natural philosophical debates in Oxfordshire. He's very well known, as we have seen before. He has many friends in the medical trade, but he's also linked a lot with Josiah Pullen, who was his tutor at Oxford and who is very committed to antiquarian and chorographical research. So although Plot first imagines a survey of all England, he settles on doing Oxfordshire and gets a lot of really good standing patronage for his work. So at the same time, he basically comes out saying that he will carry the legacy of William Camden, but focusing on Oxfordshire for the people who are offering money for this book to be published. People such as John Fell, who at the time is one of the most powerful ecclesiastical figures in Restoration Oxford, but also Ralph Bathurst, who is a physician and theologian, president of Trinity College at Oxford, and the later Duke of Norfolk also gives money towards this project. So in a way, it starts to become clear that his interest is in medicinal herbs, at least. It's not just a project of recording them in the country or advancing any medical theory or reshaping pharmaceutical markets, but he is doing this for an antiquarian inquiry, offering a framework for kind of rooting this knowledge in the place. And he has an interest in showing that Oxfordshire has these like powerful, very good medicinal herbs. And many times we see how he not only praises the praise, but also links it very closely to the person who owns them. He's very skeptical of farmers or any laborers. He thinks they are actually encroaching on his inquiry and that they could never benefit from knowing about these medicinal herbs. It is only the gentry or the owners of the lands that are his audience. So in that, he creates this kind of entire idea that by linking his intellectual standing with their gentry ownership, he can almost create the kind of the idea that these herbs are very strong, just as good as foreign, not because they have evidenced medical properties, but because they come from Oxfordshire, and that's what at the same time makes them perfect, while also making Oxfordshire that much richer. After his published work, he was very praised for the attention to detail, and in a way, the money that was put into Oxfordshire paid off quite well. A lot of patrons recognized that this was a worthy scholarship and it earned Plot full approval. He gained an appointment as a curator of the Ashmore collections, a role as a professor of chemistry, and also his approach, interestingly, is reproduced by later county natural historians, which I found really interesting reading John Morton's Natural History of Northamptonshire, where specifically where he's about to talk about medicinal herbs, he references back to what Plot did, and in a similar way asserts that Northamptonshire, very famous for its pipe clay production, has a lot of herbs that are as worthy of the stamp and title of terra sigillata as any of the foreign ones. So this is still very much a work in progress. I'm still thinking about these kind of reciprocal relationships. But what I hope to show eventually through this project is that county histories, in a way, bring the exotic to a local scale and local to exotic, portraying English soil as capable of conferring nobility and authority and even medicinal virtue compared to most celebrated landscapes in Europe at the time. And Robert Plott's treatment of medicinal herbs illustrates to us how local materials could be elevated through learned authority and almost strategic comparisons. Um, and by doing so, he not only contributes to early modern natural history, but also asserts the worth of English resources in an increasingly globalized context, telling us a lot about the interplays of place, knowledge, and social hierarchy at the time. And yeah, if anybody has any information that might be useful for me, I will be more than welcome to receive it.